Hi everyone, this is Nathan from Snap Surveys and welcome to another of our Snap XMP webinars. Today we're going to be looking at a brand new feature called Show As Buttons, which opens up some nice new design options for your questionnaires and forms. It should take about 30 minutes and as ever there's plenty of further resources available which I'll be pointing you to at the end. We start by taking a set of standard text answers and setting them to be clickable items, effectively replacing more traditional checkboxes. We're adding some images, either alongside or instead of the worded answers. And then I'll be introducing another new setting which eliminates the idea of columns within a question. This works really well when you've got a longer list of possible answers. Along the way, we'll be exploring various design options associated with Show As Buttons and hopefully offering you some options to give your questionnaires and forms a fresh new look. A few key benefits to the use of Show As Buttons. I think more than anything, it's a chance to change the norm, hopefully fighting back on the dreaded survey fatigue. Online surveys and forms are part and parcel of everyday life, so anything you can do to give people a subtle nudge can only be a good thing. Because respondents are clicking a word, phrase or image, the perceived clickable answer area is going to be bigger, making it feel like it's an easier answer to give. We talked a little bit about changing the mundane. Show As Buttons introduces an element of gamification to your forms, hopefully enticing respondents to continue further and get as far as submitting their data at the end. For you, the survey designer, hopefully you can see that it's nice and easy to set up. If you're using images as part of your clickable answers, you'll see that you're using individual images rather than uploading a combined image and then having to set the hotspots. If you're using words, then it's simply that, with no images involved at all. So for anyone that's familiar with map controls in Snap, it's a far simpler setup than that. And finally, this feature combined with the no columns option opens up some novel design options for your questionnaires and forms. Okay, let's take you into the software and look at some of the examples of how you might incorporate these new features. I'm going to be using a very simple questionnaire today that simply has placeholder question and answer text throughout, rather than a survey which is trying to emanate real-life questions. I'm going to start off by running a live example of this questionnaire to Edge, and I've got a link here for my survey. Initially, I've got a fairly standard single choice question where obviously I can check the boxes. You can also click on the answer text and that will in turn check the boxes for you. And I guess this is what you might call a normal question. The next example is the same question, but this time there's no check boxes and instead we are clicking on the answers or the answer text to make your selection. And you can see the text is changing colour and there's a background colour. Now this is the Show As Buttons feature in its most basic setting, effectively a word which has no checkbox and minimal transformation. There may be times where this gives you the desired effect that you're looking for, particularly if you have got sort of background colours as per my next example. But I'd suggest there's probably more elaborate transformations and effects that would be more appropriate to the majority of your projects. So my next couple of examples have borders for the words or around the words, which give more of a natural feel that these are clickable items. And as you can see, I've played around a little bit with the borders, so some go across the full screen, some are much smaller, sort of sticking to the size of sort of the largest word, and then the last example, you can see they're all as large as the largest word. And ultimately, it's probably down to personal sort of choice in terms of design choice, which sort of type of borders you go for. And largely, it's probably going to be dictated by the type of answers you got. So are you talking about one or two words? Have you got sort of whole sentences or sort of phrases, etc.? But let's have a look at how these are set up in Snap. So if we move back to my Snap file, so this is my standard sort of single choice question. And to activate it as a sort of Show As Buttons option, we just go to Show and As Buttons. And then we can just tick the show box to activate that. and that will in turn turn the answer text into the checkboxes, if you like. Now, I'm going to actually undo that, and instead we're going to look at some of the examples I've already produced. But that's sort of the show as buttons in its most basic format. So just going to the one I've produced already, we go back into show and as buttons, and then we have the options available. And within here, we've got a number of different options, which we're going to be sort of looking at today. But effectively, we have the unselected state and the selected state. So effectively the off button and the on button. And in this very simple example, I've simply transformed the color of the text when it's selected. So if I just move my cursor away, you can see it. We started off with sort of a dark grey text. When it's selected, it changes to orange. And likewise, there's a background sort of slight tint to grey. But as said, that's a very minimal change. Let's have a look at some of the more interesting options. So coming down to the borders. So again, back into show and as buttons and options. And we have a number of different options available. So here I've turned on borders, which just literally puts a border around the answer text. And I made the border start off grey, but when it's selected, it's going to go orange. But there's a number of other options in here, which we're going to look at. So at the moment, these borders go across the whole page. If we look at the next two examples, they're actually the same, but it's easier to see what's going on with the second example because some of the answers are slightly longer. But if I go into buttons again and options, so for this one, we have text only, basically meaning that the answer labelers or the border is as long as that particular answer label. Or if we look at the next one, it's not quite so easy to see what's going on here, but when this is a live survey, we go to options. This time I have reduced width. So the borders will actually be as long as the largest answer label. So actually the border will be cut off here when it's a live survey, and all the buttons will be exactly the same size. Now, if you were to have that option set, then you might consider centralizing these answer labels. So if I was to do that, we'd go into alignment. I click on one of the answer labels. It's actually called the code label, and at the moment it's left aligned, and you might look to center align it. Personally, I think it probably looks better when it's left aligned. But again, that's all personal choice. The examples below, however, I have center aligned those ones. So again, we'll see these live in just a moment. But the first thing I've done is go into columns, and I've actually spread that across the page. So rather than it going just down in a long column, it's now spread across the page. I've actually set them to 8 columns, mainly just because I wanted to squeeze them up a little bit to the left. Again, you can't really tell from here, but all these boxes, if I go into the show as buttons again, we've actually got a number of different border options. So the first one has square borders, the middle one is going to have the slightly curved borders, and then the final one is got round ones. So if I just run through this as a live survey again, next page, so you can see the different borders there, and the idea really is to try and match them up with the navigational buttons. So I've got the navigational buttons with the slightly curved edges, so realistically if I was designing a whole survey, I'd go for these middle options. Now, I spoke earlier about some of the advantages of show as buttons over map controls. For anyone that hasn't used a map control before, if you were looking to do this as a map control, you'd actually need to create an image of these words. So not only would that take time and effort, but if you were to zoom in, if I just zoom in this browser, those images would then start to deteriorate as you zoom in, where you can see because this is actually just text, it doesn't matter how far I zoom in, it's always going to be as clear as it needs to be. Okay, let's now start thinking about incorporating some images. So if I go on to my next page. So you could have images alongside your answer text, and you can see here that as I select an option, it's changing color, but it's also adding an additional border. The option below, I've already got a border, but that border is then changing color. And so far these have all been just single choice questions, but you can apply the show us buttons to any traditional checkbox type question. And below I have a number of grid questions, again some which include the text and the image, and then at the bottom I've got just the image. Again, if these were map controls, what we actually need to do is, rather than uploading individual images, we would end up having to build an image in something like Photoshop, one image, upload that image, and then effectively draw around all these different sort of squares. So much easier because we're just uploading individual images. So again, just going to pop back into Snap to show you that. So I come down to my questions. So again, just making use of the columns just to match in with the questions above. And then the images themselves have just been added using the normal font and insert image. So I've done that already, so I'll just click on one which I've already done. So got my image here. Now do be sure to make use of your alt text when adding images. This is the sort of hover text, and not only is this an important accessibility function as that's spread out by any sort of screen readers, but it also serves to form the text used within your analysis. If, like in my last example, I have a question where actually I don't have any text in that answer, I'm just using an image. So you'll actually be using this alt text in your analysis when you're building your tables and charts. And also if you're going to be seeding any data into a subsequent part of your survey. So in my example today, I have a follow-up question about the accommodation, which has been routed to say only pop up if they give one of the negative answers, so options 1 or 2. And you can see I've inserted the answer text from question 14A. Now, again, let's have a look at this in action. So at the moment, I've chosen one of the positive options. As soon as I choose one of the negative options, I have the additional question pop up with that alt text appearing. And continuing with accessibility, it's the alt text which is going to be used in the text-only version. So this is the version that if someone using a text reader, they'd probably be making use of this version. And you can see it's the alt text which is being used for that last question when actually there is no answer text. But I'll go back to the full image version. Moving on to the following page. Here we've got some examples of semantic type questions, and initially I've just got examples of what's known as a map control and a slider control. In keeping with the idea of gamification and keeping things fresh and novel, these do work well, but there are a couple of things just to consider. So some people just aren't going to like using these, and they're perhaps going to struggle with the slider aspect of this. They might find it tricky. And I should say that when I'm saying that, I'm thinking of my dad trying to fill this one in. As mentioned, for map controls, we're talking about uploading an image or a combined image and then drawing around the different sort of hotspots on that image. So with Snap, we do provide you with a 5-point scale, a 10-point scale, and also an 11-point scale. But if you wanted a 7-point scale, then you would need to create your own image and then draw around your own sort of hotspots. And again, because we're talking images, we have that issue that if people do scroll in lots and lots, then those images will start to degrade. Again, so let's look at how we can do this instead, but this time using show as boxes. So down the bottom, we've got a very similar idea, but this time we're just using words. So there's no images involved. We haven't got to create images. It's a lot more flexible. We can have as many answers as we want. It's just a case of typing the answer text in there. And again, if we zoom in, the text is as crystal clear as it was when it was zoomed out. Let's move back into Snap to look at those questions. As I said, I've got the traditional map control and the slider control, but then coming down into Snap, So it is a semantic scale question, but just to point out that actually a semantic scale question, if I go into columns, I've actually turned off the sort of background setting to say semantic. The reason I've done that is because a semantic scale question is essentially displaying the first answer and the last answer and hiding all the answers in the middle, which in this example, we want those answers to potentially display. So I just undo that. So I've turned off the semantic sort of function of the semantic scale. And the other thing I've done is activate the grid label, which is my answer on the left. So I've just gone to show and grid label, and I've activated the footnote, which is my text on the right. Okay, time to introduce another new feature, which I think is a great way to display a question which has got a larger set of answers. Now, again, just going to pop into the live example first. So to begin with, I have a sort of standard sort of multiple response question and asking people to select as many words as they see sort of work and associate with Allgood University. If we then look at the next question, we're making use of the new feature called no columns. So effectively, this is removing the column setting and just allows people to move along and kind of loosely depicts sort of the look of a word cloud, really. Alternatively, we could keep the column setting, but perhaps make use of the show as buttons feature. As you know, I do like to talk about accessibility quite a bit. And one thing just to bear in mind is transitions. So although this is transitioning from one color to the next, at the end of the day, not everyone's going to be able to see those sort of different shading or color changes. So anything we can do to make it transition or transform even more is always going to be helpful. So in this next example, as well as changing color, it also pops a tick in there. So there can be no kind of confusion as to what's been selected and what hasn't been selected. But let's now look at combining the no columns as well as the show as buttons options. And I think this is quite the triumph in these sort of types of questions. So again, we have a really obvious transition. So we've gone from no column, no borders to a border. And it's just a case of the respondent working their way along the list, and anytime they get to a word which they think relates to Allgood University, they just make that selection. This list is randomized as well, so none of these answers are going to be selected more just because they appear in the first line or on the last line. And you can see I've got a number of different transitions. So I've got borders which change color, and as we saw a moment ago, borders that change color, as well as the addition of the tick. So again, let's have a final pop back into Snap just to look at these. So we have our standard tick box question, multiple response question. So initially just turning off the column structure. So we go to columns and we've set that to none. So that just removes all the columns, and as I said, it loosely depicts what the analysis sort of word cloud layout. As mentioned, this question is randomized, so if I was to right click and go into variable properties, you can see for ordering we have random. Now there are a couple of other options available, but random is probably the right one to go for today. And we have got the option to exclude certain options from that random list. So I could fix the first option, so friendly as being always at the top. And if I was to also perhaps do 50, 51, that means that the very last two answers will also appear at the end. So it will only be randomizing the middle list. But I'll remove that one today. The next couple of examples are again just making use of the show as buttons feature. Again, various different examples in here. So do we want to have that border? Do we want the colors to change of the borders? Do we want the text colors to change, etc.? Again, arguably an even better transition would be to go from no borders to a border, a transparent border to a colourful border, and then the final one has the tick as well. So if I move into this one, so yeah, we've got a number of things going on here. We're adding a rounded border, which starts off grey, goes orange, and then when it's selected, so remember this is the off state, this is the on state. When selected, there's the tick box is going to be appended to it. So again, let's pop into Snap and look at how that tick is added. So it's just making use of effectively the tick which was disabled when we turned on Show as Buttons. So if we go back into Boxes and Images, so today I've chosen one of the tick boxes, which is simply a tick. It doesn't have the sort of traditional sort of square box around it. But if I go into Edit and Browse, so it's taken me straight into the small folder, and there's a number of different images in there. The default folder is actually the medium folder, but I would say probably for this example, the smaller tick boxes probably work a little bit better. I'm actually going to quickly pop into the large folder just to make it easier for you to see what sort of images we're talking about. So obviously some of these boxes have actual borders to them. I've actually gone with the checkbox, which is simply a tick with no border. Of course, you could browse off and create one of your own images. It doesn't have to be a traditional tick or cross. Then you can insert any kind of image into the box once selected. But I'm just going to cancel out that. Okay, so obviously entirely up to you how creative you get with your sort of designs. Let's have a quick sort of recap of the ones that we've done today. So I'm going to go back into my live survey. Just going to restart this survey. So yeah, you're obviously welcome to get as creative as you want, but do keep in mind your branding in terms of your colors and accessibility in terms of the transitions, remembering that accessibility is as much about making the survey as user-friendly as possible as it is about making sure that the survey works for someone who's using a screen reader. So we've looked at various options, looking at sort of the different types of borders that you might include, whether the borders are going to be changing with the length of the text or whether they're all going to remain the same. We've looked at sort of the different borders to try and match them in with your navigational buttons. We've looked at adding in images, and as I said, you don't have to have text in there. You can just have images, but being really careful to make sure if you're not going to have text that you're definitely making use of that alt text, because not only is it accessibility, but it's also going to be used for all your analysis and anything else that you pipe in further down the survey. We've looked at how you might look to use show as buttons to replace perhaps some of your sliders or map controls. And then we've been looking at the setting which effectively removes the columns and combining that with the show as buttons. And as I said, I think that works really, really well where you've got a long list of options and you're just asking people to work their way along, choosing which words jump out them. Okay. Again, anything you can do to make that transition as obvious as possible, I would suggest is a good thing. Okay, so hopefully that's provided you with a variety of uses and examples of how you might look to use the new Show as Buttons feature. As mentioned, more than anything, it's a chance to refresh your questionnaires and forms as we all bid to keep our respondents engaged. I've included a few QR codes which will take you off to some additional resources, which include the support hub page for Show as Buttons, and also there's a recent webinar I did on another new feature which allows you to include a question within the body of an email invitation. And assuming that you want that invitation to look enticing, then I would recommend probably using Show as Buttons for the question that's going to be included in that email. If you have got 2 minutes spare to complete a short question about today's webinar, I'd really appreciate that. That can be found by using the last QR code on the right. Alternatively, you can find a link to that survey using the chat in this Teams call. I will be emailing you in the next day or so with these links as well as a recording of today's webinar. Thank you for joining me, and we will hopefully see you again soon.